We're so honored to have Peter here to share with us today following this introduction and a brief Q&A between Peter and I to open up the conversation. Peter's career spans decades across a wide swath of diverse accomplishments with a worldwide impact. Through his art, Jemison has explored a variety of topics, from creating political works that portray contemporary social commentary to those that reflect his relationship with the natural world. Widely shown and collected, Jemison's works are rooted in the framework of Native American arts. Known for his naturalistic paintings and series of works done on brown paper bags, his art embodies Orenda, the traditional Haudenosaunee Iroquois belief that every living thing and part of creation contains a spiritual force. His paintings, videos, and mixed media works have been exhibited in numerous solo and group exhibitions in the US, the UK, and Germany. He is also an esteemed administrator, curator, editor, and writer. Jemison's works are included in such significant collections as the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Heard Museum in Phoenix, the Institute of American Indian Arts Museum in Santa Fe, the Denver Museum, the Denver Art Museum, the British Museum in London, and the museum, this German museum I might pronounce incorrectly.
No problem.
The Weltkirch Turn in Frankfurt, Germany. We're so honored to host Pete this afternoon to share with us, so please join me in welcoming Peter Jemison.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Peter asked me to kind of formulate a question to open up the conversation, and I was wondering, what are some of the first materials that you recall, maybe at a young age, being drawn to, and have you maintained a focus on any of those things in your career today?
Let me first start by saying Nyaweskano Swagwego Onandawa ni a ganonza tepdel ni kyaso ganandagan ni kanange. I'm using Onandawa Gawano. In our language, the word Seneca has no meaning, and we refer to ourselves as the people of the Great Hill, and that's Onandawaga. And Gawano is our language, meaning our language. I give thanks that all of you are well. I belong to the Heron clan. Everyone who is Seneca belongs to one of 8 clans, 4 on the bird side and 4 on the animal side. And we are of the clan of our mother. So my mother being a Heron, I'm a Heron. My father was a Wolf clan member. And the Heron clan gave me the name Ga Nonza Dehdao. And that's my second name. It refers to something about the way the pails are organized on the floor. So it doesn't have any real specific meaning. It is a title. I carry the title of a faith keeper, one of those who maintains our ceremonial way of life. So to get to Hope's question, the first thing that I have been told that I worked with, and I kind of remember it, was clay. But it was a kind of clay that my mother used to have to take and put in our oven until it softened up enough so that I could work with it. And it wasn't something you could fire, it was more plastic. And I used to make whole armies of little figures out of that, and keep myself busy for quite a while doing it. I have to say I really don't work with clay. It hasn't been a medium I've used much since that time. I did take ceramics, of course, when I was an undergraduate, and learned to throw on a wheel and also build pots with coils. The next thing that really grabbed my interest was oil painting, but that wasn't until I was probably a freshman or a early sophomore in my college career at Buffalo State. And I have to say the nice thing about Buffalo State was that they actually taught you how to use materials. They didn't just kind of say, here, go and do whatever you want to do and, figure it out. They actually gave you instructions. So I learned to paint. I learned how to handle oil paint. And so it was my first love, and I kind of stick with that. I still do that, even until today. Second question?
Oh, I guess I'm curious about the role that planning versus intuition, or maybe not versus, but in combination, plays into your practice.
Yeah, I'm not real spontaneous as a painter. I do use photography. And I kind of, for a long time, when I first started painting, landscape painting was just something that was so easy for me that I don't know, I just thought it was too easy, if you can believe that. And I remember someone asking me, why would you go away from something that you're so good at? And I just said, well, I've already been able to do that. I want to do other things, so I have to figure out what else I want to do. And this was my experience. I was living off campus while I was going to Buffalo State, and I happened to see the reflection of a landscape across the street in my front, the window in my front door. And it really simplified the whole thing. And so I just simply copied what I saw in that window. And that sort of gave me this clue of how to simplify rather than get into all of the detail in a landscape and be able to capture that feeling of it. And that's why it was relatively easy for me. And, when you're a sophomore in college, and I was 19 years old, and people start asking to buy your work, you can kind of, get a big head, and all of a sudden you think you know everything. Of course, you don't know anything. But that's what happened to me. Of course, it's like I was unbearable. Truthfully, yeah. And so, it was always good when somebody would kind of knock me down a peg or two and tell me, you're really quite annoying, or, whatever, because otherwise I could be very annoying. And I was filled with questions. I wanted to hear from anyone that I thought knew something about painting and knew something about art. And so I was always asking questions. And I had been told to do that by a student who was a senior when I arrived as a freshman. And I kind of took his word and did that. And in those days, you could join the Albright Knox for $5 if you were a student. And the beautiful thing about that is it gave you complete access to their library and their openings. And the only stipulation the librarian had was, don't put any books back. Leave them on the table. So you can imagine what an invitation like that is. You could just keep pulling out any periodicals, any books, anyone, on any artist you were interested in. And after a while, I was giving my fellow classmates tours of the gallery of the museum because I had studied all the different artists that I was interested in, so now I could talk about their work. And for a while, I thought I might be an art historian. I went to Italy, and we studied Renaissance art, and we went to all the major cities to see the art. And so, that was another area of interest, and I thought I might be willing to stick with art history. But really, my first love was being a painter, being an artist. And along the way, I've been everything but. I've been an administrator, I've been a teacher, I've been a person who works with our Confederacy, and I do repatriation work. I do protection of sacred sites. I do all the work that they ask me to do, both my nation and my Confederacy. And that's sort of an obligation. If you are Haudenosaunee, meaning you're a person of the Six Nations, and you have an education, even though they're very suspicious of your education, you will be asked to read all the letters that come from wherever and respond to them. Either respond to them by just doing whatever it is that they would like to do, or by actually corresponding. I'm terrible at correspondence, so that I would handwrite and hand off to my assistants, and then they would write the letters. But I did all that. And so my art was consequently all around the edges of all the other stuff that I was asked to do. And I went along like that for a very long time. Probably the better part of 40 years. I ran an art gallery in New York City for contemporary artists for the American Indian Community House. I came here to work for New York State Parks, ran Ganondagan, developed it from an overgrown weed farm into what it is today. Raised $12 million to build the Seneca Art and Culture Center, and raised about $600,000 to build a bark longhouse. I never thought I could raise money, but that's turned out to be something I was good at. So I did all that. Then, all of a sudden, my art career decided to take off. And I realized that that was happening, and I knew I was getting very close to the time period when I wanted to retire, but the two of them kind of went like this. I was just about to retire, and all these other things were happening. All good things, not negative things, good things. And so I just retired and decided to give my full time to my art. And I kind of then had a little bit of a crisis, because I had to start thinking of myself as an artist, which is where I started from. And what is an artist? What does an artist do? How does an artist price their work? How does an artist deal with galleries and, patrons, people that want to buy your work? So I handed that all off to the gallery. I didn't want to deal with, selling art. I'd done that. I didn't want to do that. I don't know. Maybe we could look at the images. You have to show me how to advance. What is the first image I'm showing you? I don't know how many of you are aware of. Can we go back? Are aware of 3-Eye Atlas? How many know what 3-Eye Atlas is? Nobody. Okay. Well, 3-Eye Atlas is this interstellar traveler that apparently came from someplace outside of our universe and entered our universe on a trajectory which took it around the sun. And it came back from the backside of the sun, and it's now kind of on this elliptical journey. And it doesn't behave like a normal comet, and it's enormous. It is really enormous. There's some estimates that it could be 3,000 miles wide. It won't get real close to Earth, but it will pass through our solar system, and it's taking a lot of different telescopes to see it, because no one telescope can completely grab it in its picture. But with a composite of various telescopes around the world, they've been able to construct something that probably is what it looks like. And then there are those people who think the whole thing is a hoax, and there are people like Avi Loeb at Harvard who is convinced that it is something significant, and that it is one of only 3 that came from someplace outside of our universe that has come into our universe that we've had the opportunity to see. All of this interest I have in it kind of goes way back to having a nuclear physicist as my physics teacher when I was an undergraduate. And his favorite expression was in those days, and you can convince yourself that this is true. In other words, he couldn't show you the theories and the theoretical things that physics deals with, but he was always saying, and you can convince yourself that this is true. So I guess I've convinced myself that this is true, that there is this interstellar, very large object traveling through our universe. Next slide.
Do you want me to say, or this is the button that goes next?
Okay, now that I know that that's the button, if I screw up, I'll call you.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
So last summer I designed this turtle, and I had to do 2 paintings to create it. One of, seeing it kind of in a profile, but then the majority of people will see it from underneath. So then I did a painting to get the underside of how the turtle would appear. And what we wanted to do was tell our creation story, which is how the world came to be as it is. And it begins with a woman we call Sky Woman, who came from Sky World, and eventually gave birth to a daughter, and the daughter gave birth to twins, the left-handed, the right-handed twin. And the way we chose to tell the story, Bill Krause, who is the singer and dancer that's at the lead of the group, had already done a version of the creation story using our Hatagainonge Yoinzage Ka, which are the social dances that we can sing in public, and that each social dance has a story that it tells. And so it can, if you put them together, you can create a story of the creation of this world using our social dance songs. And so that's what he did. And so then we created, characters from the group so that we could act it out as well. And then the turtle, which is what caught the Sky Woman. When the Sky Woman came from Sky World, she was conveyed to the back of a giant turtle by birds who caught her on their wings and brought her gently to the back of the turtle. And then she danced a dance we call Escanye, which is women's social dance. And as she did it, she took mud that a muskrat had brought up and spread it around to create North America in our creation story. That's how this part of the world that we live on came to be, according to our Haudenosaunee creation story. And so we started off at Ganondagan last September, and from there we took it to Massachusetts, and from there we took it to Brooklyn, Prospect Park, and then we took the performance to Manhattan, to a park that's on the Hudson River around 14th Street. And so now we're setting up a tour that will start next summer in June at the Idle Museum in Indianapolis, and then we have to get sort of like 4 venues in a row. The piece was fabricated in France, in Toulouse, for a group called Plasticines Volant. They work with large inflatables, and they're the group that's underneath it. And then when it's deflated, it can go into a suitcase and travel across the world in a suitcase. And then you inflate it with helium, and it can be easily moved around. So anyway, we're lining up this tour for next summer, and I'm quite excited because it was fun working with them, and it's fun working with the singers and the dancers, very young singers and dancers. So I'm going to move ahead to a show that is just about to close. It's at Rutgers University at the Zimmerli Museum at Rutgers. And this painting of mine is on the cover of the catalog for this exhibit. It's Indigenous Identities Here, Now, and Always. It was curated by a very good friend of mine, Jean Quick-to-See Smith, who passed away just last December, right before the exhibit opened, actually. And so we all gathered at the Zimmerly. It was kind of a memorial to Jean. And this painting has quite a history. I painted it in 1972 when Red Power was just sort of getting some momentum. You might have heard of the American Indian movement. And I in time got to know many of those people from the movement. And then this painting was given to one of my sister-in-laws, and it was in her house, and then eventually wound up in her car garage and had a hole poked through the middle of it. And when I saw it first, it was covered with dirt. It had a big hole in it, and and yet I wanted to recover it somehow. So I began cleaning it, and then it was purchased by a foundation in Santa Fe. And unfortunately, they purchased it from a photograph, so they didn't know there was a big hole in it till they got it. And then when they found out there was a big hole in it, they had a problem, right? Well, first they were pretty mad about the whole thing, But they decided to fix it. So they had it mended, had it restored. And I'm telling you, if you look at it, you cannot tell where the hole was. It's amazing what they were able to do. And so I met the people that were restoring it. I met the photographer that was going to photograph it. And of course, I went to the foundation. So anyway, some things can come back to life even when you think it's a goner. So this was one of them. So what is it about? Okay, what it's about is our people come in a variety of colors. We're not all dark-skinned. I don't look like an Indian. They always tell me that. I don't know what an Indian looks like, but I don't look like one. So anyway, I wanted to illustrate the fact that we come in a lot of different colors and that we're kind of like a sand burr. If you know what a sand burr is, it's very hard and it's very sharp. And so when you try to pull it out of your woolen clothing or any clothing, your fingers get hurt. And I kind of felt as though that was the way the United States views us. They can't get rid of us, and we tend to bug them, and we also sometimes injure their pride. So anyway, that was kind of the origin of this piece when I began working on it, from a sand burr. I've been excavating my past. And this is a photograph of me standing on the lawn of my front yard, my home, in a little town called Irving, New York, which is a border town of the Cattaraugus Indian Reservation, and the northern end of the res. And these were my friends as I was growing up. If you continue down this road that's in front of my house, you'll come to the Cattaraugus Creek. And there used to be a car bridge over the creek. And on the other side of the creek is the Cattaraugus Reservation, which is where my cousins and my grandmother and all my relatives lived. And we lived in the town. And that gray building in the background was called, it's no longer around anymore, but it was called Baird's Hotel. And Baird's Hotel was a favored watering hole for many people from many places who all came there, because across that bridge there was also a canning factory where they canned beans and beets and tomatoes, and I worked there in the warehouse when I was about 15 and 16 years old. Warning. When you decide to excavate your past, you're going to confront today many things that may not be resolved from your past. So, as a word of caution, if you decide to do it, you will meet things that you hadn't thought about in a long time. And some of it you never stopped thinking about, some of the things that happened. There's a young boy in the photo who was my best friend. And I mentioned working in the canning factory. One day I came home for lunch from the canning factory, and my mother and sister were crying in the kitchen. And I wondered what was going on, of course. And they told me that my friend, and we were both 17 years old at the time, was going to die in about 6 weeks. He had a large tumor in his chest. And even though they removed most of it, it spread to his body. And so he died when we were 17. And, you know, you always wonder, you know, I get to live as long as I have, and his life was in a very short span of time. And there's so much to it. I think I've probably said enough. This is an art intervention. Last fall, I got a phone call from a curator from the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh. And she said, we're going to be doing the Carnegie International. Carnegie International happens about every 5 or 7 years. And she said, you were the first artist we thought of. And I was like, whoa, seriously? And she said, yes. And she said, because you have worked so much with your community. You have spent a lot of time promoting the artists of your community and so forth. And that's what this exhibit is going to be about. It's going to be about artists and their relation to their community. And so she said, that's why we thought of you. So I said, okay. Well, of course, I then thought, boy, I better come up with something good, you know, because Carnegie International. So I had this idea. I woke up one morning, and I decided to recreate an exhibit I did in 1975. In 1975, I owned a van, a big cargo van, that I had bought in California. And what I decided to do was to go to each of our Haudenosaunee communities and ask the people living there who was an artist that really represented their community in their view, someone who was important in their view as an artist. And so when they told me who it was, I then went and looked that person up, and I either arranged to rent work from them, or if I could, I bought the work from them. I had a small grant from a group called America the Beautiful, and we were approaching 1976, you know, and all of that. So America the Beautiful came into existence. At any rate, I then went to all of our different communities and gathered artwork, and I had cases fabricated for the work that needed a vitrine and a case. And then I went to the communities one more time, and I said, I want to bring the exhibit here, but I need a place to hang it up, you know, and to put it out for your community to see who these other artists are. And in most cases, they went along with it. And so I took it to the Onondaga Nation School. I took it to the Akwesasne Library and Cultural Center. I took it to the Tonawanda Community Building. I took it to the Sailor Building at Cattaraugus and the Haley Building at Allegheny. And so I decided I would recreate this idea, but I would choose a different group of artists. I would find a van, and then I would start to go around and collect the work, and then I would drive the van to Pittsburgh, and I would have one of my paintings wrapped around the van, not over the windshield, but wrapped around the van, and then I would have the van left on the plaza in front of the Carnegie Museum of Art. And I called it an art intervention because that large object behind the van is a Richard Serra sculpture. And on this side of the sculpture, on this side of the van is a Henry Moore. And they're on the plaza, right? And so this is kind of an art intervention of native art on the plaza. And they love the idea. And, you know, so I located a 1968 Chevrolet minivan, and after $8,000, it's running like a top. And they've been supporting this whole idea, right? And so this is the last piece of it. You know, when we used to go to Pittsburgh, and now I'm talking about in the 1700s, when we used to get into a canoe on the Allegheny River, paddle down the Allegheny to the Susquehannock, paddle down the Susquehannock to the Ohio, and arrive in Pittsburgh to trade, we had beaver pelts. But this time I'm going to ask the individual artists to make something that they were willing to barter with the people of Pittsburgh. And I'm going to ask the artists of Pittsburgh to bring an item to barter with. And we'll do it on the plaza in front of the museum, maybe on the opening. That's my thought, okay? So that's what I'm doing. And these are two of the artists that I've selected to be part of the exhibit. The artist on the right is Tom Huff. He's Cayuga and Seneca and Cherokee and Catawba. Yes, many different, you know, family line. But Cayuga, he's enrolled Cayuga under the Deer Clan. And the artist on the left is Hayden Haynes. And he is Seneca Nation, Deer Clan, but he's also Muskogee and Kiowa, his father. And he is from the Cattaraugus territory. And Tom, too, is from Cattaraugus. At any rate, these are two of the artists. And so they won't be, well, Tom will be showing that piece on the right, but Hayden is making a new piece. He's going to go and obtain an antler and create a new piece for the exhibit. What I like is Hayden takes ideas from the age of the internet and from AI and all of that, all these sort of plastic objects, and kind of marries them with our traditional materials and make some interesting combinations. So we'll see how that goes. I've been involved with quite a bit of repatriation work. My confederacy designated me as the chairman of the Haudenosaunee Standing Committee on Burial Rules and Regulations, and that was in 1989. And I've been doing that work on and off ever since. We think of our wampum belts as cultural patrimony. So what is a wampum belt, if anyone doesn't know? A wampum belt is made up of shell beads. And the white beads come from Lightning Whelk, and the purple comes from the Quahog clan. And these shells were harvested by Algonquin-speaking people who lived along the Atlantic coast. And they then traded the shell across the Sound, what we now call the Long Island Sound, to people like the Pequot. And the Pequot fashioned beads from them. And then we provided protection to the Pequot, and in turn, they provided us with wampum beads. And then we assembled the beads into belts to record important agreements or important ideas. And this one is called the two-row, and I'll briefly explain it. So there are two purple rows. One of them is us. We're traveling along the river of life, going forward in time in a canoe, and everything we need to be who we are is in that canoe with us. Our way of life, our language, our belief system, our knowledge of medicine, our law, everything we need is in our canoe. Traveling next to us in a ship are the people who came from across the ocean. And in their ship, they have everything that they need. Their belief, their religion, their law, their knowledge, whatever it may be. And there are 3 beads in the center between those 2 purple rows. And it says we can live in peace and friendship forever so long as we can respect the right of each to exist. We don't want the people in the ship to get out of their boat and try to steer our canoe. And we don't want to get out of our canoe and try to steer your ship, right? And if you can agree to this idea of mutual respect, this agreement will last as long as the grass turns green at a certain time of the year, as long as the sun continues to make its journey across the sky, and as long as water flows downhill. That's how long this will last. And so we first made this agreement, I shouldn't say we, but the Mohawk Nation did, with the Dutch, when the Dutch wanted to establish trading posts on what they called, the Algonquin-speaking people called Mahicantuck. Henry Hudson turned it into the Hudson River. And the Dutch wanted to establish trading posts along the Hudson, and so the Mohawk presented them with this belt and said, this is the way we have to view each other if you're going to be trading in our territory here and building your settlements and so forth. And so I think it was quite ingenious, really. It's so simple because now that I've told you that, you can tell somebody else, you know this. It's so simple, that's 2 rows, 2 different feelings. Okay. You know, the work that I do never ends, unfortunately. If you see in the middle there's an ancestor who was, they were digging a trench for a solar project, and when they did, they ran into one of our ancestors from about 1700s. And out of the ground came bones and funerary objects that had been buried with this ancestor. And the plan was that the orange fence in the background was going to be protected. That area wasn't going to be touched. But unfortunately, outside of that area, they encountered the remains of one of our ancestors. And so they then had to redesign their project and move away from that area, which in this case they've agreed to do. The company has, well, say the representatives of the company. I don't know about the company. The representatives of the company have agreed to that. That's something we've been negotiating. And my understanding is yesterday this ancestor was taken care of by the Tonawanda Seneca, who essentially reassembled everything that came from his grave, put it back together, and filled the trench. So that's how we resolved this one. But this is ongoing, and that's the work that I do. So I was contacted by the Buffalo Sabres. I was telling my friends Bob and Pat, and they asked if I could create a design for their Native American night back here in October. Well, I should say the beginning of November. And so I thought about it, and I wanted to do something unique. So on the left, my left, your right, is a tump line. And what is a tump line? Well, it's a burden strap, essentially. And it goes across the forehead. The design part goes across the forehead, has very long straps that come from it that you can tie a heavy package onto your back, or you could tie your baby carrier on your back and left your hands free because you supported the weight with your forehead and your neck. Now, these were made by a woman who was making it for her brother. When her brother was going to get married and his wife was going to become part of the family, they would make one of these tump lines and gift it to her so that she could contribute her work to the family and the well-being. the thing about it is the design is dyed moose hair. So it would be similar to creating a weaving using dental floss. And imagine doing this at a time when you had firelight, light from the fire, or you had natural light. We didn't have any little spots, you know, that you could. And this, there was no graph paper. Nobody graphed this out before they started weaving it. The whole thing came right from the woman's head as she was weaving it. And there's about 5 of them that are still extant. And we have 3 of them on exhibit at Ganondagan right now. 2 came from the Smithsonian, 1 came from the Rock Foundation. The one I'm showing you came from a museum in Paris called Quai Branly. And I'll get to Quai Branly in a minute. Anyway, this is the design I came up with for the sabers based on the concept of the tump line design. And in the center below the logo that they use is a buffalo hoof print, since they are the buffalo sabers. So Native American night, they put this on various pullovers and t-shirts, and they did have some warm-up jerseys that they were on. And then I designed the numbers, the players' numbers, using the same concept of the tump line designs. This one, the one on the left is not exactly one I used, but at any rate, you get the idea. So this painting is in the collection of the museum called Quai Branly. It's an anthropology museum in Paris. It's called Quai Branly Jacques Chirac. Every president names a museum after himself in Paris. And so they bought this painting. And it has a couple of titles. If you remember the Gene Autry song, some of you are old enough to remember Gene Autry, Don't Fence Me In. And then there was another one, we used to be free like the birds and the animals. We went wherever we wished. And then fencing was brought, you know, and fencing was put around people's farms and their property, and there was a whole sense of property rights, and, you know, what you can and cannot do on this particular property. And then there's one other kind of a hidden message here. You know, there's a very famous painting by Jackson Pollock. It's called 3 Blue Poles. So I decided to do 3 red poles. Not necessarily in honor of him, but I'm using some of the ideas that he had, right? And basically he was saying art for itself, for its own sake, and at the same time he was dealing with this idea of the space of a canvas and working within that canvas. And how do you define that space? He did it with skeins of paint. I'm doing it more with this combination of abstraction and naturalism to define the space. And that's really where I guess my work lies now, is doing that kind of thing. That's pretty much it. If there's any questions, I would be happy to answer them. And as I always say, no question is a bad question. I'm interested in what you have to say or what you want to hear. Please. Yes?
Sir, I think I heard you say that amongst your other professional involvements, you directed a gallery?
Yeah. Excuse me. In 1978, the American Indian Community House, which was then located at 38th Street in Manhattan between 5th and Madison, contacted me and asked me if I would come and run an art gallery for them. They had a storefront, and it was a showroom, and they had converted it into a gallery space. And so they asked me to come and run that and be the first director of the gallery. And after I was there only about 2 years, their lease ran out and they had to find another location. And so they wound up going down on Broadway and 13th Street, but there was no place for a gallery in that space which was really just office space. And so I went to Soho, which was, then sort of an art center, south of Houston in Manhattan. I went there to a location on West Broadway, and I found a second floor loft, and friends of mine and I totally renovated that loft space. We had to remove all this light welding equipment that was hanging from the ceiling and rewire the place and, paint the walls and create walls and all that. And we did it on a shoestring. Didn't have any money. And we opened it up in 1981 as a gallery space, right? And I ran that until 1985. I did quite a few exhibits. I did around, something more than 30 exhibits at time span. And the only museum that really took a particular interest in what I was doing was the Queens Museum in Queens. They took an exhibit that I had curated and they put it there. And it was pretty successful. It was a good exhibit. So anyway, that's what I did.
What I was curious about was, since you had that experience, when you said when you renewed your artwork,
yeah,
you had to learn the art world from the point of view of an artist.
Yeah.
After having been kind of on the other side of the table.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it probably sounds strange, but I never thought I was all that successful when I was running the gallery in New York. I mean, we got a lot of attention from various press, the New York Times, New York Magazine, Daily News, and others. But Village Voice used to really cover us pretty well. Anyway, I never thought I was that successful. I thought that I should have been more able to get the artists that I was showing give them more opportunity beyond what I was presenting, beyond what I was doing. Since then, everyone tells me I was very successful. And that I was groundbreaking and all these other things, these other adjectives, And I'm liable to get a big head again, so I don't try to focus on that. And that's in the past. Maybe it was. But when I was coming to my own career, I went through a bit of a crisis. I don't know why. I just couldn't figure it out. I was like, what the heck do I do now? I have to think about, if a gallery takes me on, I want to make money for them, I want them to sell my work, make money. For me and them, because with galleries, they're either going to go 50-50 or 60-40 if you're lucky. So anyway, went through all that, like how do I price it, what do I say? But I didn't want to be I certainly didn't want to be the one selling the work. I wanted the gallery to handle that. Very fortunately for me, a friend of mine opened a gallery in Buffalo, on Main Street in Buffalo, which he called K-Art. He bought a building, he renovated that building, and he devoted it to contemporary art. And found out that people in Buffalo don't buy contemporary art. And they certainly don't buy contemporary Native American art. Okay, so he went out of business. About a year ago, he went out of business. And it was tough for him, he was very sincere about what he was doing. But I just got the news literally this week. Now the Birchfield Penny Art Center is going to use that as a space for showing contemporary art. Because it's fully renovated, there's 2 floors that are beautiful, and so the Birchfield Penny is going to kind of use it as an off-site location for their exhibits. And so I'm very encouraged by that. That sounds good to me. In the meantime, also K-Art introduced me to a gallery in New York, which now represents me. And that's been a real blessing. Been very, very fortunate. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Peter. My question is about your work with repatriation of remains and cultural objects.
Yeah.
I know that probably a decade or more ago, it might have been New York City, it might have been on a national level, some laws changed and they began applying more pressure for institutions to begin really examining their deep archives and repatriating sensitive objects and human remains. And I know that you've been involved in some of this work.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, and I know I've spoken with both you and Michael Galvin, I believe is his name, about the ways that contemporary indigenous artists have been creating recreations of like funerary objects for institutions so that they can repatriate the cultural objects.
Yeah.
But my question is, how do you feel our local institutions are doing on that count?
Okay. You know, there's nobody here to respond, so in a way, you know, I want to make this too bad. I've been at it. When I say I've been at it, okay, I have been working with the Rochester Museum and Science Center since about 1990. And in terms of repatriation, it took me 20 years to get the first return of human remains. It took me almost that long to get the return of sacred objects. There was a lot of foot dragging. There was a lot of obfuscation. And I wouldn't give up. And so finally, fortunately, they hired Jamie Jacobs, who works for the Rock Foundation. And Jamie, and some people left the institution and new blood came in, and there was a change of thinking. And so things opened up. The law has continued to evolve. It's called the Native American Grave Protection and Repatriation Act. The short name is NAGPRA. It was first passed in 1990. It took until 1995 before they created regulations. And then just about 2 years ago, they added some more recommendations or regulations, I guess I really should say, whereby institutions have to do more consulting than they had been doing. There are some institutions that did virtually no consulting with Native Americans, even though they had the materials in their collection. And so when they were suddenly put in the position where you're going to lose your federal support, you're going to have to be, you know, like disciplined or something, they had to act. And they've been trying to figure it out. Interesting, like, for example, the American Museum of Natural History in New York, their answer was to cover their display cases with, you know, dark cloth, because they couldn't honestly say they had been consulting to resolve the questions of what was sacred and what should be returned with the people who they belonged to. But you'll have to remember that the American Museum of Natural History for a long, long time had a statue in front of the museum which showed Theodore Roosevelt on the back of a horse and an African American walking here and a Native American walking here at, you know, beneath Theodore Roosevelt. And finally, the Roosevelts came around to the conclusion that that wasn't a good idea. So they agreed to remove the statue from the front of the building, and that took a while. And then they finally decided that, well, maybe we should start talking to some of these people that we have collections of. And so that's proceeding. That's kind of happening now. That's a long-winded answer. Okay, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm really curious about this idea that like your own art practice flourished later, and for all of these years you're kind of like being almost a cultural ambassador or go-between or doing this work on behalf of your community. And I just wonder what kept you thriving and inspired. Like, how did you avoid getting burned out, right? Because I think there's often this, like, either we're working on our own creative practice and we're really inspired, or we're doing these like obligations or being activists, right? And among the younger generation, there's like a desire to be an activist, but then activists get burned out. So like, what apart from just knowing that you're doing good kept you from being burned out in all of this like work that you put in on behalf of your community, on behalf of like arts justice, cultural justice?
Yeah. Well, at one point I came to the understanding that I was a cultural worker, and that with that title I gave myself, I could do anything, you know, that sort of fell under that umbrella of cultural worker. And so I had to continuously, you know, I'm going to be probably more truthful. So what happened was, the regional office, which was supposedly over Ganondagan, was 2.5 hours away from where I worked. So they never knew what I was doing or where I was doing it. And they used to say to me, and we think it's probably better that we don't know. And they were right, you know, because I couldn't have worked under anybody's thumb or with anybody standing at my shoulder watching what I was doing. I wasn't doing anything illegal, but I was doing everything, you know, that I thought needed to get done that anybody asked me to do. And that made sense to me. If it didn't make sense to me, I didn't want anything to do with it. But if I understood it, or if it could be explained to me, that's what I used to tell people too, was I didn't think these things up while I was on the car ride over. I went to the people that I knew, and I asked them before I started the work what I should do and how I would resolve these issues. Because, number one, I had to protect myself. I had to protect myself from forces that are not of this world. They are in a sense, but they are forces unseen by you and I. And so when I'm doing that work, I was fully cognizant of what I was doing, and I could not bring injury or harm to my family. So I had to approach this in a way in which I was of the mindset that is necessary to do that work. So that's kind of how I did it, right? I was in that mindset. I was working with people who understood as much as I did, or who could be taught what I knew, you know. And whenever I met somebody who understood what I understood, there was this wonderful exchange of knowledge, of understanding that takes place that's very inspiring in a way, very uplifting, okay? So all of that came into play. And then every once in a while, somebody would say, you know, we want to include you in a show, and we're going to need some work of yours. And that was sort of enough at one point in time, as long as I was still being thought of as an active artist, to keep me going. I think that's the answer. Yeah?
Just to return to the question about the cultural objects, in the case of institutions like RMSC or others of that level,
Yeah.
when you finally, decades later, are able to retrieve those objects, are they going to Ganondagan? Are they going back to the clans? Where do the objects appropriately go? Where are they returned when they're returned?
Well, it depends on what it is, and it depends on the willingness of the community to accept it. So, in the case of human remains and those things that were put in the ground with them, they're going back in the ground. That's the intent. And that's what we've been doing. That is a lot easier said than done. I'll just put it that way. The sacred objects, belong to societies. And if that society is ready to receive them and care for them, then they'll go back to that society. And that won't be my decision. That'll be the decision of the society. It'll be available. They will have to be willing. Yeah, well, cultural patrimony, most of that I've dealt with. I mean, most of that has made its way back into communities. There are exceptions. I understand. Well, when we started off, the Oneida Nation, you should know that I think there's 4 different Oneida nations. Okay, there's the Oneida, but the Oneidas are in 4 different locations. There's Oneidas who live on the Thames in Ontario. There's Oneidas who live at Green Bay, Wisconsin. There's Oneidas who live on Oneida territory in central New York. And then there are Oneidas who live at the Six Nations Reserve. There are Oneidas that live at the Onondaga Nation. There's others. And they knew that whenever something important came up, they weren't always going to be of the same mind. And that was going to slow down the whole process of repatriation if we were trying to get them all on board together. So they said, we'll approach repatriation on our own, separate from the standing committee. And we all agreed that that was a good idea. Go ahead, do your thing. And now there's one more wampum belt that they have got to get back. Someone has to. And a friend of mine is going to make a film about that. And she told me the other day that I was going to be interviewed about this. So I'm going to just talk about what I know. I don't know anything about that belt. I wish I did. Wish I knew something more about it. Yeah, you had another one?
I loved the intervention, the art intervention you did on the plaza, and the idea of having the bartering in a public square.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed walking by the monumental painting that you did on the Hyatt, that was installed on the Hyatt facing the river.
Yeah.
I was walking by that and seeing
Yeah.
it. Do you think that there might be more public art in your future?
I would love it. You know, what we are approaching is it what, the 350th anniversary, you know, and there's going to be a big to-do about the Rev War. And of course, we were victims of the Rev War. I never like to think of us as victims. My son would kick me if I told him that. But the fact is, there was a campaign directed by George Washington, which came into our communities and destroyed 40 towns, burned everything we could eat, cut down the finest apple and peach orchards that existed, and basically drove us to the British, who were occupying Fort Niagara, and the British didn't want any part of us inside of Fort Niagara. So we were living in makeshift homes, huts, outside of Fort Niagara, on the escarpment above the Niagara River, this time of year, when the snow fell 5 feet deep and remained for the whole winter. And you couldn't really go after big game. It would be hard to get your firewood, and God only knows how many people died as a result of that. But probably almost 2,000 people went there from our different towns that were destroyed, maybe more, and remained there until about 1783, when we began to occupy what now is called Buffalo, and began to build new homes. Away from the bark longhouse, we started building log cabins. What was the question? Public art, yeah. Public art. Yeah, I want to do some. I don't know. I have an idea, a couple ideas, but it will require support for the ideas, you know, to do them, and I shouldn't be the only one getting the opportunities. So I've been working with a group, and we've been in communication quite a bit, and we just had a conversation Friday about our next moves. And so as the anniversary comes, Michael Galvin really wants to focus on the message of peace. Not the message of war, but the message of peace. And I understand that. And so we'll see how that goes. And we're looking for the support that would be necessary to have a public art of some type in maybe 1 or 2 locations that are sort of the prime spots. There's a great deal of signage. I don't know if you know this, but New York State in 1939, on that anniversary of the Sullivan-Clinton campaign of 1779, created these huge stone monuments and bronze plaques that extol the virtues of the American Army. And they're all over the place, from Easton, Pennsylvania to Western New York. There's never been any sort of response to the message that is on these bronze plaques. It's probably time to do that, to really take up the case. There are other monuments and signs as well, besides those that I've just mentioned. At any rate, a lot to do. I want to thank you all for coming today. It's been great, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to you. Thank you too. Thank you.